If you know, Lashi Bandara is head straight into this connection. This intro was primarily crafted who are going to introduce this Lashi Bandara for the first time. Surprisingly, there is a lot of people in India who are yet to be introduced, who are considered to be the greatest philosopher of all the times. I genuinely think that history will remain for his progress and research in the field of harmonic analysis and the branch of mathematics. It was my honor to host this podcast and screen share the upcoming journey with the Lashi Bhandara professionally and how it is an iconic mathematician of all the time. Welcome Lashi Bhandara to our podcast. That is the quantified Siddharth. Welcome to my show.
Thank you, Siddharth. So that's a very gracious welcome. I'm not sure if I hold myself in such high esteem, but thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Now, there is one quote which I always remain in my mind, that is blend of Eastern philosophy and the Western analytical approaches. That is the first thing which I keep in mind to always solve any type of question or any type of knowledge which I want to gain in my life. So, what's your views regarding this? Like, is it the true view or not?
Well, that's a deep and difficult question. I don't really know whether there are necessarily objectively true views. I think it is about what works for you. I mean, I'm very much an empiricist, so you have to sort of think about what works. You have to sort of, have a sense of belief of what you think will work.
Okay.
You've got to go for it, and if it doesn't work, you've got to revise yourself, and that's the basic empiric method. And I think, regardless of what philosophies and what approaches you have, that's ultimately the final testing ground, right? Reality will tell you whether things work or not, and so I'm very much a pragmatist. So I don't really think too much about philosophies. I just think about what works.
Oh, that's a nice approach, sir. Like you're working towards that is working, and that not the thing like which is not working right now. That is the concept which is totally understandable.
Yeah, I don't know what so the question always is for me, if I'm doing something, what is the value? So what is the value of me having a certain approach if it doesn't somehow reconcile itself with reality? I mean, maybe it does, but that has to be tested. And that's and feedback is really ultimately the thing. I mean, this is also in our teaching approach in the unit, as you've seen. Feedback is the main thing, right? So
that's all right.
So ultimately, reality will give you feedback.
Nice, sir. Now, sir, if we are talking about like your university changes, like you have resumed from the University of Gothenburg to the University of Potsdam, like in your experiences, and then the Brunel University, which is in London, and finally landed at the Deakin University. Then how is this approach occurred to you? Like what the ideology towards it? How had you solved towards it?
Okay, that's an easier question to answer, so I'll definitely answer that. So I actually did my undergraduate at Monash University, which is in Melbourne. So there's a few more to the list.
Yes, sir.
So I should start at the beginning. So I went to Monash, which is where I initially started actually in an arts and a science degree. So we have double degree programs, and I was actually doing performing arts and philosophy in the arts component, and I was interested in pursuing computer science in the science component.
Okay.
But certain things happened. I didn't enjoy I didn't progress. I didn't mesh so much with the philosophy component. I loved the performing arts, but then I moved on, and they introduced a new degree program at Monash called Science Computer Science.
Okay.
My first year of computer science actually consisted of a lot of theoretical computer science, and that's where I really first saw a glimpse of real mathematics. So it's interesting that I first saw sort of real mathematics in computer science and not anywhere else, because in school you have a lot of mathematics, but it's all rote. It's not really rigorous. It's not with proofs. So the first time I saw that was in the theory of computing, and I loved it. So then when they introduced this double degree program, I changed to the science computer science program, and I pursued maths as my major in science and astrophysics as my minor, and I did my computer science degree also. So this was the double degree. And when I finished with that, I actually took some time off. Okay. I went to Canada, and I wasn't the most sort of gifted maths student. Certainly there were very, very many other people who I graduated with who were far, far better than me. But during my time in Canada, I actually worked polishing shoes.
Really,
And-
sir?
Yeah. It was for a firm called the Boardroom. I don't know if they still exist. It's a grooming spa and salon.
Okay.
And because I was polishing shoes, I had a lot of, and it was a new business, I had a lot of spare time. So a few years before that, I actually had traveled through India. And in a bookshop, I think in Lucknow, I bought a book by James Moncrief called Topology. And that's a very important field of mathematics. And I started working through this book on my own, self-paced. And that's really when I connected with really deep, rigorous math. So I had been introduced to it in my undergraduate, but where it really connected was there. So I came back to Australia and I ended up then thinking, I had initially thought that I would go further into computer science, but then I decided to go into mathematics. And I did my honours in mathematics after that. And then subsequently I went to the Australian National University for my PhD. And then the choices of Gothenburg, Potsdam and Brunel came about. It wasn't really out of choice, it's really out of necessity. So what maybe many people don't understand is that when you're pursuing a career in academia, once you've done a PhD, so the PhD is still something that you work on under the mentorship of a supervisor. And you still have to prove that you're an independent academic. So then you have to do these things called postdocs. So postdocs are positions which are not permanent. So they are maybe for a few years. So my postdoc at Gothenburg University was 2 years. And my postdoc at Potsdam I did for 4 years. But basically there, you're given a lot more independence. And these are 100% research positions, typically. Typically, you don't have teaching involved, okay? So the idea there is that you have to sort of gain and garner research independence during that time. So I was at Gothenburg University working with Andres Rosen. He's a really fantastic and a really amazing mathematician. He was also supervised by my late supervisor, Alan McIntosh.
Okay.
And who was a really wonderful person in his own right. Alan was a really amazing person. And then I spent some time, during that time in Gothenburg, I was a part of a junior trimester program in optimal transport in Germany, in Bonn, for 4 months, where I was working with a group of three people, Sajjad Lagzian and Mike Munn. And that's when I met Christian Behr, who then I did a second postdoc with in Potsdam University. And had it not been for that travel, had it not been for my time at Bonn, I would never have met really Christian. I mean, maybe I would have met him, but not in the capacity that we connected and we realized that we had sort of interesting mathematical questions that we wanted to pursue. And subsequently, he had gotten a grant through the German Research Foundation, and then that grant was reobtained with me for the second round, but initially he brought me over to Germany because I met him. So somehow being able to travel and being able to be in these places, that's really, really important. It's really important because that's how research works. Research is not a solitary sport. It's something, it's a team sport. You've got to really be able to interact with others, and then you have to provide, you have to create those opportunities. Especially in mathematics, which is very much, contrary to what people think, it is very much a team sport. It's not about individuals somehow doing things. It's really about people talking to one another, understanding what people have done. And finally, Brunel. So Brunel came about because I had done 2 postdocs and I felt it was time for me to now try and get a permanent position, an ongoing position. And typically when you go into an ongoing position, a part of that position is going to be teaching. Okay, so that's a different kind of skill set, that's a different kind of thing. But you have to firstly sort of show your research independence, and then you get a position where you now have teaching and research. And I applied to many, many positions, and I got rejected by many, many, many places. That's something that I think people don't understand. So I would probably say about 80. I would probably put it at 80.
80.
80. That's probably the number of rejections I've had, right? So in mathematics, for any position you create, you have about 80 to about 400 applicants for one position. So those are the odds, and that's life.
Yes,
It doesn't feel good. Rejection never feels good, but you have to get used to it, because that is ultimately reality. You have to face sort of, rejection, and you have to learn to move on and live with it and try again and try and apply for other places and see how you go. So finally, Brunel made me an offer as a lecturer, and I moved there. I worked at Brunel for 2 years, and I gained a lot of skills. It was really, really fantastic being in London, and it was an interesting part of London to be in also, because there was a natural connection to Punjab. Because Brunel is located very close to Southall, where there is a very big Punjabi community.
Yes.
So that was also interesting. So a lot of the food that I've tasted here, I actually tasted in Southall first. And then I wanted to move back to Australia because that's where my family is.
Okay.
So then I started applying for some universities in Australia when I saw some mathematics positions, and Deakin made me an offer. So that's my academic story up to this point.
It's like a long story. It's like an unpredictable story you had told me, sir. And also I want to tell you, like you had mentioned about that if you want to work in a group, we have the people like that type of mind, that your brain pattern and the type of people and your peers pattern must be like similar. Is it true?
I don't know if necessarily the brain pattern needs to be true. I mean, so as a mathematician, you develop certain insights. You play with certain problems, right?
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're playing with ideas, right? So I'm a pure mathematician, so ideas are the thing for me, okay? So it's not necessarily about, where my mathematics is applied. That's not the point. The point is doing something more fundamental, right? I do fundamental science. So you play with ideas and you gain certain insights because you're playing with certain problems. You may be computing special cases of certain examples, trying to understand some general phenomena that you're interested in.
Yes, sir.
And when you're working with others, it's really that kind of a collaboration is because you're trying to bring about two pieces of expertise together.
Yes.
So for instance, I have one paper which I wrote during my PhD, where I had started thinking about some abstract framework in something called metric spaces. And I had written down, so it started off because my PhD supervisor said, read this paper, I think this has some interesting ideas. And I started reading this paper, and I wanted to kind of think about, well, the methods here, the techniques here, how general can I make them? Where can I make them really work, right? So he had written things out in arbitrary dimensional Euclidean space, but I wanted to know, can I think about more general structures where these ideas would work? And then I started writing some things down in these spaces called metric spaces, and I soon realized I can't make it work there because there is a fundamental key gadget that's missing. So I tried to read some other papers of some other mathematicians who had sort of thought about some connected things, and I couldn't understand it. But there was one thing I could understand. So I thought, let me try and take this tool and see, let me take this gadget and see if I can make those techniques now work at this greater generality. And it ended up working. So I wrote this paper, but then my supervisor said to me, okay, you've done some hard work, but what's the point? Like you've set up something general, but actually, like people want to still be able to compute some specific things with it. And so I spent some time trying to make it work and trying to think about a different context called Lie groups. And I was looking at the wrong kind of problems there.
Why?
Because I was looking at these problems which are called elliptic problems, which are not interesting for Lie groups. What's interesting for Lie groups are actually called subelliptic problems.
Subelliptic problems.
And so Alan said, look, this is not so interesting for this community of people. If you're looking at elliptic things, this is not the right kind of problems to look at in this context. So he introduced me to one of his friends and colleagues, Tom de Elst, who's a professor in New Zealand, and he said, and he got Tom to explain a very hard problem in the subelliptic context. And then Tom started explaining it, and I realized, and I didn't know any of the specifics of this, right? But I started to realize actually that problem that he was explaining to me could be rephrased in the language that I had developed in this metric space language. So that was a Tuesday, and on Wednesday we sat down and we and I said to Tom, "Is this true? Is this true? Does this exist in this context?" Because that was a framework that I had built, and I wanted to know whether these components of the framework could be satisfied. And he said, "Yes, because of this paper, because of this result, because of this result." And on Thursday, we cracked open a bottle of champagne, and we had resolved the subelliptic problem, the subelliptic Carto square root problem. And that became a paper. And you see, the way that it works is that I had brought about a certain kind of expertise. I had developed something, and that allowed for that problem to be approached in a different way to how it was approached before, right? Because the perspective that I had developed was on these metric spaces, and it was a different perspective. And then, people like Tom had been thinking about the subelliptic Carto square root problem, but using maybe a different set of tools that didn't quite sort of get them there. So, I did. So that's to me that's one of my favorite papers, because in some sense I don't know half of it. Because half of it is due to Tom, right? He brought about a certain kind of tools, or he brought about certain kinds of specific thinking in that context. I brought about different kinds of toolbox. Alan was there to somehow mesh it all together. And that's, I think, an example of a really beautiful collaboration. And in mathematics, collaborations are really equitable. So in many fields, you have the notion of a first author. We don't have that notion. So our author listings are always alphabetical. Okay? Because the idea is that we don't have large groups of people working together. Typically, at most it's maybe 5 people that work together. But really it's an equitable effort, because we're all bringing different perspectives to a problem, and that's how we work together. So it's not so much that we need a similar mindset, but we need to really be able to complement each other. Of course, there's a social factor. If we're personalities that really can't get along, it's not going to be possible to work together, because it is a very intimate, it's an intimate exercise when we're working together, because we make ourselves, we demonstrate our vulnerabilities. Our collaborators get to see what we're not good at and what what our weaknesses are. So it is a vulnerable situation for everyone when you're collaborating, especially in maths. I can't really speak for other areas because I don't know other areas, but in mathematics you have to showcase your vulnerabilities. So there is a certain personality aspect that comes into play. But I think an aspect that's really important is the fact that you have something to say, you have complementary ideas and knowledge that you can provide in order to bring, problem to resolution.
So basically, as you mentioned, the teamwork is very, very essential for any type of work. If you're doing in the mathematics or any sort of, you have also mentioned, you were doing the science and the arts both simultaneously. So, sir, I'm going to give you a condition right now. There are a group of 5 people, and if any person and the group of 5 people are saying that we have to make a startup sort of thing, and one person is saying that we will start the startup on any type of soil erosion, soil degradation. Another person is saying that we have to start this startup in the field of technology, science sort of thing. Other is saying that we have to improve the people's needs, the people needs in terms of human healthcare. So, as a judge in that condition, what would be your comments towards it? What would be the most important thing if we are taking these 3 ideologies?
So the 5 people are wanting to start a startup together, or are these separate?
No, sir. So they're starting the setup together, but they have different ideas. Means they are sitting in a round table and they are suggesting some of the ideas. You are suggesting any idea, I am suggesting any idea, but they are having sort of quarrel sort of thing, I think so. So what would be your ideology towards it as a judge?
Okay, so I know nothing really about startups, but of course I know about ideas and innovation.
So basically, I want to showcase your mindset as a judge.
Yeah. Only. So what I'm concerned about with what you've said is their aim seems to be creating a startup.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that's perhaps not really should be the focus. The focus should be the ideas.
Yes,
And once you have the ideas, you can think about a startup, right? It's sort of to me, it feels like the wrong order, right? So the thing should be that you have some idea about, we can maybe help a certain, group of people, we can do some sociological progress or whatever, and then we have some ideas around it, and then people say, okay, maybe we can, use a startup to do this because that can incubate this and it can give us sort of,
large amount of money too.
Yeah, it gives us funding, it gives us the kind of things to do. So to me, it's sort of, and again, this may be because of my ignorance, right, in this field of not really knowing what how startups work. To me, it seems strange to start with the desire for a startup before thinking about the ideas. And in if I'm to relate, so the way I kind of make that judgment, because you want to know how I think about it, is I would relate that to maybe me doing mathematics. So it would be like me saying, I want to write a paper, and then trying to think about what I want to write the paper about. That's not really how it comes about. First of all, I have some ideas. I start thinking about certain things, and then I start realizing there's some interesting things going on here. There's some depths. Let me explore that a little bit. And then once I have that, I say, I should write a paper about this, right? Yeah. So it's really the reverse order for me. So yeah, anyway, that's my opinion. That's what I would think about it.
It's an enthusiastic approach towards this type of conditions are very, very sophisticated. Like for me, as a freshie in this college, it's like it's such a big condition for me. Like this incident has already happened with me, and that's why I was asked to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about various publications which you have done already. As I had researched on you, you have, I think so, you have published 7 to 8 papers, 8 research papers. Is it true?
I think it's more like 19, isn't it?
Okay. Okay. It's 19 papers, but I researched on 7 to 8 papers.
Okay.
Maybe that's
yeah.
So, can you please tell that what are the 3 main papers, what are the 3 main publications which are very, very crucial, which is very, very interlinked with your soul? Can you tell?
Yeah, okay. Thanks. That's actually a very nice question. So first of all, let me just sort of qualify sort of the place that papers take in mathematics. Because in some fields, it's possible to publish very large quantities of papers. In mathematics, usually our papers tend to be quite long. Okay. So typically, a typical paper might be 50 pages long.
50 pages?
That's right. And because it is, we have to provide a proof. If you have a theorem, you have to have a proof. And proofs are, it's basically like creating a new algorithm every time to solve a problem.
So, I want to interrupt in between your conversations. Like you have said about the algorithms. So, like in what field you are thinking about the algorithms? Like, are you comparing any type of algorithm with a human problem or any sort of programming problem?
No, I just mean algorithm in the sense of a recipe, right? In mathematics, you have a theorem, which is a statement that tells you something, right? Like you've already encountered some of it. I think in your SIT 192, you would have seen a theorem like there are infinitely many prime numbers, but you have to then reason it. And actually the proof that you're giving for that, this is a famous theorem due to Euclid, of course, that establishes without any doubt that there are infinitely many prime numbers. But that is a method, that is a new method that you come up with. It's like an algorithm, right? Because it's a recipe. Anyone can follow it. Once you've developed the proof, well, anyone in a contextual sense, anyone sort of who is within sort of that context can sort of pick it up and they can follow it and they can try and understand it, right? So, but you don't have to come up with that new method as you do it. But coming up with that new method is what we do. In mathematics, that's what we do. So, and that's why also peer review can take up to 2 to 3 years. Okay?
3 years.
Yes. So when you send a paper to a publisher, it can take 2 to 3 years before you hear back.
So, like you mentioned about the 3 years, is it after becoming the advanced level in that field or from the basic?
No, I mean So when a paper is not just published. It's not like I write a paper and immediately it's published. Okay. It has to be sent to peer review. So other peers. So when I submit something to a journal. The journal sends it to some other referees. I don't know who the referees are, but they have to judge the paper. They have to read the paper, and they have to then say that this paper is worth publishing, or maybe they say, okay, this paper is not up to standard, the novelty is not, good enough, so reject, right? Or they say accept. So you have to again go through many rejections, right? This is a part of the teaching that we also give you, that you've seen with
some improvements to
with fix and resubmit or redo, and these statuses that we give in this self-paced learning that you've seen. So this is mimicking what happens in some sense in reality when you're in the workplace, but it's also what happens in academia. When you write new novel papers, it has to be peer reviewed, and that peer review process is the others in your community judging whether your work is worthwhile or not. Okay, that's what makes science reliable. If you didn't have that, then anyone can publish anything, and then things are not going to be reliable, right? It's reliable because other experts judge your work. So let me sort of contextualize that in terms of sort of mathematics. So one paper that I really am proud of is the work that I did. So in my PhD, I really thought about how to bring certain tools from real variable harmonic analysis. So this is an important modern area of mathematics, which has been used in many different areas. Okay, so even the basis of things like wavelet theory that has led into video compression and so on and so forth. A lot of the heart of all of this is really in harmonic analysis. Okay, so I sort of thought about how to bring some of these techniques from real variable harmonic analysis to a geometric setting, to an intrinsic geometric setting. Okay, intrinsic. So what is intrinsic geometry? So intrinsic geometry is the geometry. If you were a two-dimensional ant living on, say, this piece of paper that you have here, and you don't know that it's sitting inside something, it is the geometry that it will be able to detect. Okay, so you can replace ants with us. So we are living in this universe, which is a four-dimensional geometric structure, right? There's 3 coordinates of space and 1 coordinate of time, and we see curvature, and that curvature is due to mass. This is what Einstein's relativity theory tells you. And we can detect it, but we're not going outside of the universe to detect it. Because if you go outside of the universe to try and see curvature, you have to explain what the outside is, right? So there is intrinsic geometry, and that's a geometry that we can measure without requiring an embedding into some external thing, right? So we're not looking from the outside, but we can detect curvature from within. So I wanted to bring these real variable harmonic analysis techniques to this intrinsic geometric setting. Of course, it doesn't work in all settings, so under certain assumptions it will work. So that was my PhD work, and I really enjoyed it because it made me really understand sort of the harmonic analysis to a greater depth, but it also allowed me to really understand geometry to a greater depth, and I of course made a novel contribution because we resolved the Carter square root problem under some geometric conditions. So that was my first contribution, and those methods were then recycled in a slightly different context in another paper that I wrote, which was to try and understand something called the Riesz topology for Dirac operators. So the spin Dirac operator is really the object that somehow is used in the study of the electron in the presence of like curvature. Okay, so in curved, in curved settings, which is what we have in the universe, as I explained, you have electrons and you want to somehow study them, and what you want to know is if you change the geometry a little bit, what happens to these objects, this spin Dirac operator, and there's a certain topology in which to try and measure this difference.
So most probably, as you mentioned about the real harmonic analysis. So after explaining all the key components of it, you had told this one question arise in my mind regarding the time machine. Is it possible to make it like you had mentioned about the 4 dimensions of a universe, and one of them is the time? Yes.
As far as we know, no, it's not. I mean, of course, you can make a time machine to go forward in time, but not backwards. Okay, so if you go very close to a black hole, you can go forward in time very quickly because your time will tick much faster relative to someone else I don't know, staying very far away from a black hole. So when you come back, maybe, for you it's been 3 minutes, but for them it's been 1,000,000 years, right? So relativistically, you can go forward in time, but not backwards.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So,
so it's just with what I was saying. So that was the second contribution I made, and the last thing I would say is been sort of my obsession for the last 5 years, which is these boundary value problems. Up until sort of I brought these real variable tools into that setting, people were more or less restricted to looking at a certain class of objects for understanding boundary value problems. And what Christian Baer and I did, who I previously mentioned, who's a professor in Potsdam, who I worked with in Potsdam. So the key novelty that we introduced was to sort of drop these assumptions on this class. So for every elliptic first order operator, we can understand boundary value problems, and that's sort of been what I've been really working on in the last few years. And then there are a plethora of consequences that come out of it. So some of my future work is also in the direction of exploring some of the consequences now that we've built this machine and we can understand these objects. What we want to really do is to see what we can really do with it and try and see, how some of the classical results. So there's a very important theorem which is called the Atiyah-Patodi-Singer index theorem. And Patodi in there is actually he's an Indian, so he was working for the Fundamental Institute, the Tata's Fundamental Institute. And I think it was very sad. I think he died quite young, but he made fundamental contributions. And so the Atiyah-Patodi-Singer index theorem, trying to understand that in more general settings is something that we are quite interested in now that we have this framework that we've built. So yeah, those are my 3 contributions.
That's a deep conversation, sir. Right? It's such a hectic thing, like understanding the concepts of your publications. It's such a hectic thing for me, like in the beginning of it. Like after understanding the things very consciously, it got into my mind.
Okay, very good.
Yes, sir. Now, let's consider a condition once again. What if Lashi didn't leave for Australia?
What if Lashi didn't leave for Australia? So you're asking what if my parents stayed behind in Sri Lanka? Very likely, actually it's interesting you ask that. And my mum and I have actually discussed this multiple times and tried to think about it. I think I would have gotten nowhere in life, really. Yeah.
Why so? Like there are a lot of opportunities in Sri Lanka too, then why you had moved to Australia? In what ideology or in what senses you have made the plan to go there?
Well, I think my parents wanted to go there to give me opportunities. I'm not sure whether I had so many opportunities in Sri Lanka, to be honest.
Okay.
I think for me, I found it quite difficult in school. Okay. I didn't sort of mesh so well with the way of teaching. I was always someone who liked to explore. I needed my freedom. I needed my time to really think about things. And in school in Sri Lanka, I didn't feel the space for that. So just to give you an example, I remember getting a very bad mark for so I was in grade 3 when I left, and then we had some BBC micros, so that tells you how old I am, in school in Sri Lanka, and we were asked. So it was computer class, okay. And I was so anxious because of these computers, because what we had to do was to memorize the different components. We had to memorize the power pack and the keyboard and the monitor, and I couldn't do that, right? I don't have a good memory, I can't memorize things, and it was very, very difficult for me. And I remember getting a very low mark, and my uncle, who was really into computers, he used to repair them, he used to, back then you had to solder things, right? It's not like today where you take RAM out and you put new things in. Maybe that doesn't even happen anymore, I don't know. That's what I remember of mucking around with computers, but back then he had to actually solder things and stuff, and I remember him being really disappointed. And it made me very anxious to be around all of these computers, because so much of the learning was about sort of understanding by, memorizing certain things and so on and so forth, which I just wasn't good at. And I just wasn't a good student in school, because I wanted to know. I asked questions, I wanted to really know things, and there wasn't really a space for that.
Okay.
And so it discouraged me. I hated going to school. And that very much changed once I went to Australia. So once I went to Australia, I remember it was a marked difference. The teachers would stay back and answer all my questions, right? And they would encourage me to ask questions. So it was a very different experience for me. And so I think my mum would be able to answer this question better. But she always says that, it's very unlikely I would have really amounted to anything. She was a teacher in Sri Lanka also. And I think partly that she was able to see that it's just not the kind of paradigm where I would have really excelled. Because you see, people are diverse. Different people learn in different ways. So yes, there are opportunities in Sri Lanka, but I think you have to really be geared in a certain way to be able to utilize those opportunities. But for someone like me, that's just not going to work. I need space, I need to be left alone, I need to really be able to think about things, I need my own time in order to really reconcile things, I need to ask a lot of questions, I need to work out a lot of those things, and a style of teaching which requires, memorization and rote, and where I have to, regurgitate certain things, that's just not a paradigm of teaching and learning that would probably mesh with me. So, I don't think I would have excelled in that environment.
That's amazing, sir. And one more thing to add in this conversation, we used to ask very different questions like, so the other people of our area or other peers, like our peers also, they used to say that why you ask so many type of questions? You are like somebody else, or you are like dog who used to bark. Yeah. So
not really. I don't know. I think look, if you're asking about my time, growing up for the first 8 years in Sri Lanka, I think it's very different there because it was a difficult time. There was sort of 2 civil wars on that front.
That time.
At that time, yeah, there were basically 2 sort of conflicts.
Okay.
Within Sri Lanka, and it was a scary period for also my parents, and I outside of my family environment, I don't really feel like I had so many opportunities to interact with friends and so on and so forth, right? And I was always kind of vocal, and I was always sort of I was a pretty sort of energetic kid, so I don't think people really called me out for asking questions. But certainly once I got to Australia, no one really questioned me for asking questions. They just encouraged it because somehow they saw me as an inquisitive child and they wanted to facilitate that inquisitiveness. Yeah.
That's the answer I was expecting from you.
Yes. And I also should thank, for my parents, it was also, I think, it was an experience for them too. They moved to Australia in their 30s.
Oh, okay.
Right, they would have been in their mid-30s. They were professionals. My dad was an electrical engineer. My mum was a maths teacher. And I think it was also quite difficult for them to somehow also make that shift. But I'm so proud of them because I think, my mum is one of the most open-minded people. She's so supportive, as is my dad. They are so supportive of me. And I think you can sort of see how they've grown as people, when they've, since they moved to Australia. So that's really something which I cherish a lot because I always wonder whether I would, if I moved in my 30s somewhere, and I have, right? I've moved to Sweden and I've moved to Germany, to countries which are somehow closer to the wider culture in which I grew up in, but I still found it quite difficult to adjust to some of those things. So I look at my parents and how they've adjusted and I think, wow, that's really commendable. I think I'm not really able to do that, so yeah.
And so one more thing, I had researched on Australia, there are so many need of the software engineers, especially in Australia. Is this statement true? In the news sort of, and from my peers also, they are saying that Australia needs software engineers.
That's probably true. It's a technological economy, so there's a lot of sort of technology that's sort of furnishing technology that's needed. So I would say that's true. But I think beyond that, the skills that you're gaining, by studying to be a software engineer is wider than just those programming skills or those engineering skills, right? You're getting a much wider berth of skills that I think can be used in so many different avenues. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Acknowledged, sir. And one more thing, I want to share a quote with you, and you can please tell me that how this quote is interlinked with you. So the quote is
a quote. Okay,
quote,
okay,
a piece of
yeah.
quote.
I thought you were going to test me with a piece of code.
No.
Okay, sorry.
So, sir, my quote is: in every human, there is a sense that something infinite has been lost. Like you had said me, like you had been felt rejected so many times. Like you have said, the number is 80. Yeah.
Oh, it's probably more than that. But
so, what is the infinite thing which you have been lost?
I'm not sure. It's an interesting quote. I'm not quite sure what it's really getting at. I don't see rejection as a loss. I actually see it as a gain. Okay, because it is telling you maybe the way that you're thinking about things, or the things that you're targeting, or your expectations that you have,
Yes.
are perhaps not so. It's not so realistic, and maybe you need to sort of reflect and think about yourself, and maybe reevaluate those expectations,
Yes.
or
Sure.
maybe reevaluate those goals. But that's not a process of loss, because that sense of self-reflection is getting to know you better. We're all born here, we're all conditioned by lots of external factors. There's culture, there's the food that we eat, there's the environment that we're in, the ideas that we see.
Yeah.
So there's so much of us that is shaped without really our consent, right? The world somehow shapes us. So there is still a task that we have to somehow get to know ourselves, and maybe to assess whether that is who we want to be. So I think in every rejection that I've had, it's been painful, okay? Again, I don't think that that's a loss, but it has given me motivation, it has given me thought, it has said, am I writing the applications right? Am I writing these things right? Or if I have a rejection of a paper, I think to myself, well, let me take on board what the referee has said. Maybe the contribution that I have made is not so novel. Maybe this is not the right level of journal I should aim for. Maybe I should aim for a journal that is less ambitious, right? And that is, again, giving me, that's gain, that's not loss. That's giving me a sense of, understanding, a deeper understanding of both myself and the situation. So I don't know how to really process that quote, because I don't really feel that I relate to it too much. Yeah.
I acknowledge all the internal feelings right now, all the pain, all the sort of thing. So, sir, now we are concluding this interview. It is a podcast. So, now last question is: after concluding this, all the questions, all the statements, all the conditions. So, what is the best statement you can give to the college people, like who are the freshies, who are the Indian people and the other countries' people too, to what to do in their life? Like I have seen many people in this world, especially in India, that they don't focusing on the education. Like our age group of 18 to 21, they are not eligible, or they are not being able to understand all the concepts very clearly. They don't even focus on the parents' instructions, like all the sort of things. So what's the most important command, or what's the most important code run you can give to all the people?
I think, sort of, if I'm to make a general statement for humanity, and I'm not a philosopher, but I think that's what you're asking me to do. I think the most important thing is for you to be true to yourself. Okay? So everything else follows from that. Why is it that people maybe are not focusing on certain things? Maybe they're not interested in that particular thing. And if you're not interested, you have to think about, well, what am I really interested in? How do I pursue the things that are interesting for me?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, excellence comes from doing the things that you love and you enjoy. And part of that is figuring out what you love and enjoy. So I think, first of all, be true to yourself, and then second of all, be kind to yourself. Because it's not about just challenging yourself. It's also about being kind to yourself. And this is something actually, so even though I'm saying this, let me just say this is something that I'm not so good at in my own self. I'm very ambitious and I challenge myself a lot. And I think that, quite often I'm not kind to myself. And that's something that I have to really improve in my own being. So, and that's something I've identified and I want to really work on. And that's really how it is. And that's a part of being true to yourself. It's about making an assessment of who you are, what maybe your weaknesses are, if you're willing to live with some of those weaknesses, because you can't fix everything.
Yeah,
and then to think about sort of how do I want to invest time in maybe, improving certain aspects of yourself. And, it's about being a whole human being, and study and academia is a part of that. But it has to be also well motivated, because if it's motivated, then you will go for it, right? If you enjoy something, you will go for it. Very, very naturally, I think, us as somehow social animals, in the wild, we are naturally inquisitive. You could see that. You could see when you take a child, and I learn a lot from children. I watch children and I learn so much from them, because failure for them doesn't affect them. Yeah, that maybe they fall on the floor when they're trying to stand up, and because they are hurt, they cry. But they don't cry because they fell on, because somehow reality rejected their approach to standing up. They tried again. And so I think we're naturally very inquisitive, and the question is, how do we really tap into that inquisitiveness and maintain that inquisitiveness? And in that, let me just say, my PhD supervisor, the late Alan McIntosh, he was a beautiful man, and he was childlike right to the end. He was 74 when he died, and he was childlike to the end, and he had this childlike inquisitiveness. And that's really what made him excel, because he was doing the things that he loved. And I've taken a leaf from that, and I do the things that I also love. And so so that's a part of my academic achievements, have been a part of that. But at the heart of all of that is really being true to yourself.
That's so basically right now I don't have words for your for your all the commands. And interestingly, it seems to be like you are missing that mathematician.
Yes. We were 40 years. So he was 40 years older than me, but we were very good friends, and we had a really great time working on some he taught me some really beautiful maths, and it was really great. So I've written actually 2 papers which I've dedicated to Alan.
Oh, nice.
Along with my collaborators, and it was one of the most remarkable experiences for me to know him.
That's amazing, sir. This podcast has literally made my day.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Siddharth.
Literally,
It's been really great. So thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thank you so much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you.